When she died, she was 88 years old. People considered her the strangest woman in America and one of the most influential. Her death sent a tremor through the stock market. Everyone she loved betrayed her, and it cost them dearly. Her fortune was estimated at almost $1,500,000,000 United States dollars. Her name was Doris Duke. On the list of the richest women in America, she ranked 18th, just a few lines below Estée Lauder, the owner of the famous cosmetics firm. Time magazine published an obituary that said, if she had wanted to, she could have become President of the United States of America. She died in a hospital, pleading with doctors to amputate her legs. At that moment, none of her loved ones were by her side. The will of the deceased became a legend of the 20th century because Doris had no direct heir. After her death, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation received $1 million United States dollars, and the Metropolitan Museum received $10 million United States dollars. All the remaining money went to her butler, Lafferty, about $500 million, including real estate. No other butler in the world had ever possessed such wealth. Panic broke out on Wall Street. No one knew how the unknown owner of a $500 million inheritance would behave. In November of 1996, the butler was summoned to court to give testimony regarding his employer's estate. Lafferty did not appear in court. On the morning of November the 8th, 1996, crime scene sergeant Robert Midford drove up to Doris Duke's house and tried to call for Mr. Lafferty. The frightened cook, incidentally, the only servant who happened to be in the house at the time, told him that Mr. Lafferty was resting. The sergeant demanded to be taken to the owner's bedroom. On the bed, in a very unnatural pose, lay Lafferty. Feeling for a pulse, the sergeant confirmed that Doris Duke's former butler, and now the owner of the house, was dead. That same day, the body was delivered to the medical examiner's laboratory. Late in the evening, an autopsy was performed. According to the physician's report, death resulted from sudden asphyxiation. What caused it could not be stated with certainty. Only the markedly dilated pupils of the deceased aroused suspicion, giving grounds to assume the use of some extraordinarily powerful drug. But no traces of injections were found on the body. Samples were taken for hundreds of different medications, and biochemical studies were carried out. We did not find any causes that could have led to sudden asphyxiation, the pathologists stated. From the cook, the only person who had not left Lafferty's house on that fateful night, it was learned that roughly 2 or 3 hours before his death, the master of Doris Duke's house had telephoned the butler and ordered all the servants to clear out of the house at once. The butler, Tuiz, noted that Lafferty was extremely hoarse, and his voice was hard to recognize. The servant went upstairs to the bedroom to receive personal instructions from the master, but no one responded to his tentative knock. Sensing trouble, Tuiz decided it was best not to interfere. He passed along Lafferty's order to the entire staff and was one of the first to leave the house. No one saw him after that. The sergeant immediately ordered a search for the missing butler. The state prosecutor, having reviewed the medical examiner's report once more, for some reason decided to close the Lafferty case with the verdict: natural death by sudden asphyxiation. It is possible the investigation would indeed have been halted if not for Doris Duke's 30-year-old adopted daughter, Chandi Duke Hefner. While the diligent cops were turning the house upside down in search of drugs and a murder weapon, Chandi's lawyers were pursuing a claim to the inheritance on behalf of their client. 2 months later, a jury ruled to transfer all of Doris Duke's property to her adopted daughter. The Duke-Lafferty household saga became fodder for gossip and chatter. In New York society, people insisted that Doris Duke's billions would bring happiness to no one. Stephen King used this story as the basis for one of his countless horror novels, Dolores Claiborne, turning Lafferty into a woman and Doris Duke into Vera Donovan. The whispering reached its peak when the missing Tuies, Lafferty's butler, was found, with his throat cut, in a drainage ditch. The case had to be reopened for further investigation. What the detectives learned about Lafferty himself and his former employer, to be frank, left them utterly bewildered. Lafferty was born in 1945 in Ireland. At the age of 20, he came to the United States. He worked in hotels and casinos in Atlantic City and tried to become a theater manager. Chance brought him to the home of Chandi's sister. That was when Lafferty's career suddenly took off. People said he worked wonderfully until he got to the bottle. However, for a time he kept his vice under wraps, and at first his employers were pleased with him. He did all the dirty work around the house. But he did not last long. He began to drink, and they let him go. He then phoned Chandi, who by that time was living with Mama Doris. It was said that Chandi herself recommended Lafferty to Doris, although she stubbornly denied this. Once in Doris's house, Lafferty quickly befriended the aging mistress and became a fully fledged member of that small, strange family. Who then was Lafferty's mistress, Doris Duke, in reality? In 1912, in New York City, the daughter of America's richest man, the tobacco king James "Buck" Duke, was born. In 1925, when James Duke died, 13-year-old Doris inherited 100 million United States dollars. Many years later, one of the many books about Doris would call her the richest little doll in the world, destined for the greatest misfortunes. James Buchanan Duke was a brilliant entrepreneur of the sort who truly made himself. He founded the American Tobacco Company, built what became Duke Energy, and endowed Trinity College with millions so that it would be renamed Duke University. People said he was the only man in the world who ever slapped Rudolph Valentino, the idol of women everywhere. Behind his back, friends called Duke Buck. He had begun selling his cigars at $1 apiece. For his little girl's birth in November of 1912, he completed construction of the most expensive mansion of its time on Fifth Avenue so that his daughter would come into the world in her own home. He named his personal Pullman automobile and his yacht after her. He surrounded his daughter with care and security. Until the age of 10, the girl studied at home with tutors, and only then was she sent to a prestigious school. From there, she wrote her father letters filled with endless "I love yous." He carried them close to his heart and reread them many times. At school, she suffered terribly because of her weight. The children did not want to be friends with an unattractive, overweight girl. Then suddenly everything changed. The children suddenly loved Doris. They treated her every prank with respect and attention. It was a true shock for little Doris when she accidentally discovered that her beloved papa had been paying the very children with whom she wanted to be friends. It is possible that realizing friendship and love could be bought as easily as dresses or dolls cracked her psyche. Doris grew hardened, but she did not blame her father. She blamed the boys and girls around her who had sold themselves. She once admitted, "My father always warned me. Be careful with people, do not trust them. No one will love you, only your money." The lesson was learned to perfection. But for the tobacco princess, money also became a real curse. At 14, 1 year after her father's death, the girl sued her own mother to prevent the sale of the New Jersey estate that Buck Duke had built on a grand scale. A luxurious 30-room mansion, a swimming pool, indoor tennis courts, and several artificial lakes and hills. She won the case and became the sole owner of the little state, which later would be nicknamed the Hollywood Trap. Sophia Loren, Marlene Dietrich, Elizabeth Taylor and Elvis Presley all stayed there for long stretches. People said that Doris had installed numerous peepholes through which she watched her famous guests. The legendary Fifth Avenue house where she had been born, together with the Newport cottage her father had bought from the Vanderbilts, she donated to New York University in 1957. At 21, Doris married James H. R. Cromwell. He was 16 years older and came from a family that had lost its fortune at the start of the Great Depression. The honeymoon lasted 2 years. The newlyweds traveled through the Middle East and Asia. Inspired by this trip, they bought a large piece of land near Diamond Head in Honolulu and built a fortress in the style of the Great Mughals, naming the estate Shangri-La. Biographers of Doris insist that on their wedding night, instead of making love, the ardent groom subjected the bride to an intense interrogation. He was most interested in what annual allowance he would receive. He also asked her to finance his campaign. James intended to run for the United States Senate from New Jersey. The tobacco princess, accustomed to the notion that everything could be bought and sold, took her husband's requests calmly, further strengthening her conviction that there was no love in the world, only money. She decided to repay greedy James in kind. At a reception attended by the president's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, Doris Duke suddenly declared loudly that the First Lady of America was wearing fake diamonds in her ears. That one sentence was enough to bring Doris's husband into disfavor and to shut his path to the political Olympus. But Doris did not stop there. She hired detectives to spy on her husband day and night. In the end, she obtained irrefutable proof of his infidelity. She immediately sent him a letter informing him that, first, she was pregnant, and second, that it was over between them and James Cromwell could get the hell out of her house. Left with nothing, Cromwell began to drink and, in the end, hanged himself. Soon Doris gave birth to a daughter and named her Arden. The girl lived only 1 day. In the death of her daughter, Doris blamed both herself and her former husband. Her despair was so great that she decided to end her life. She traveled to Honolulu, to her villa on the ocean shore, and swam far out to sea. But the ocean did not accept the sacrifice. By chance, America's famous swimming champion Earloy Donovan, training in Hawaii, became her rescuer. He prevented the young woman's suicide. That was the beginning of their stormy romance. Doris seemed to be born anew. She plunged headlong into an ocean of love. But that passion, too, proved illusory. One night, 3 years later, in a fit of causeless rage, Doris pointed Earloy to the door, and he was forced to leave, stark naked, the house of the woman he had saved from death. In 1947, Doris married again. This time her chosen one was none other than the legendary Don Juan Porfirio Rubirosa, the adopted son of former Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo. As a wedding gift, Doris presented Porfirio with a house in Paris, and shortly before their divorce, finalized only 2 years after the wedding, she gave him an airplane. She forgave him everything, even his hasty marriage immediately after their divorce, to Barbara Hutton, a comparison that always infuriated the tobacco princess. Even after their separation, Doris continued to lend him money. But Doris's money did not bring him happiness. Porfirio died in a crash in that very ill-fated airplane Doris had given him. The air disaster occurred in 1965 over the Atlantic. When Doris learned about it, she said bitterly that she had loved the most famous gigolo of her time. Doris never married again. Every man who orbited around her was much younger, and as a rule from the bohemian world. Her long affair was with the jazz pianist, a Mexican by heritage, Joe Castro. They met in 1950. He was 23 and she was 38. 13 years later, Doris resorted to a now familiar method. She put him under surveillance, and in the end, she showed Joe the door. He sued her, demanding an allowance on the grounds that they had supposedly married in secret. But this time it was impossible to squeeze a single penny out of Doris. 2 years later came a new infatuation. The young, handsome designer Edoardo Tirella. Persistent rumors had it that, besides Doris, Tirella was carrying on with other women. Doris learned of Edoardo's dalliances, and their relationship ended tragically. As he was opening the gate, she literally ran over Tirella with a car. The police deemed the death unintentional. Friends noticed a strange pattern. Every man who deceived Doris died not by his own hand. Yet Doris herself, it seemed, had nothing to do with it. One might have thought that a wicked fate guided events, shielding Doris herself from retribution. By the way, Porfirio Rubirosa did not die in an airplane accident over the Atlantic. In reality, he died in a car crash in Paris in 1965. Mrs. Duke was friendly with Elvis Presley and with the socialite Klaus von Bülow, both of whom she often invited to dinner in the 1960s and 1970s. The renowned director Vincente Minnelli, Liza's father, also visited. Guests were served the finest wines from Buck Duke's cellars, at no less than 1,000 United States dollars per bottle. Among her good acquaintances was the celebrated jeweler Kenneth J. Lane. Doris inaugurated a curious tradition. She made jewelers fashionable figures, raising them in rank to the level of movie stars. By that time, Doris was already a woman of a certain age. But she did not seem like an eccentric old lady at all, acquaintances recalled. She was most concerned with protecting the environment and with the rights of children and animals. We were all sure Doris would live to 100. It looks as if some kind of sorcery interfered with her life, Elizabeth Taylor said after her death. Those closer to Doris claimed something different. In their view, she never recovered from the death of her daughter. To put it plainly, she began to behave oddly. She kept feeling that she had to love someone in order to escape the curse that pursued her, and she spoke a great deal about reincarnation. It was then that Chandi and Lafferty appeared on her horizon. Doris was already 72 when she became seriously fascinated by Eastern mystical dance. She even planned to become a professional dancer. Her age did not frighten her. In 1983, Doris went to a workshop on Eastern dance in Honolulu. During a walk, she fell off a bicycle and badly injured her knees. In the hospital, Doris met a young woman named Chandi, the daughter of quite wealthy parents. Barefoot, Chandi looked like a hippie, although the era of flower children had long since passed. Her parents, disapproving of their daughter's lifestyle, had cut her off from her inheritance. This happened just as Chandi's childhood illness flared, bringing savage pains in her legs. Affliction brought the two women closer, and beyond their ailments, they found they had much in common. They talked passionately about saving nature and about Eastern art. But the main reason for Doris's rapidly growing attachment to Chandi was loneliness. The tobacco princess fancied that the strange barefoot girl was Doris's dead daughter, Arden. "You are the reincarnation of my daughter," she told Chandi. It must be said that Chandi did not think to protest. "I will officially make you my daughter," Mrs. Duke declared. "I am tired of suffering." It was the most expensive purchase Doris made in her life. She bought herself a person. Chandi later said in court, "Doris promised to make me her heir in exchange for my devoting my life to her and managing all her affairs." After leaving the hospital, the future mother and daughter set about carrying out plans they had discussed so much. At Chandi's initiative, Doris removed from the Gobi Desert 2 camels listed in the Red Book of Endangered Species. To transport them, a Boeing 737-300 was purchased for 25 million United States dollars, configured for 19 passengers. Shortly thereafter, Alain Delon purchased the same model. How much Doris paid the Mongolian authorities to overlook the unlawful caprice of the 2 American women remained a secret. In 1987, at the Somerville courthouse, 75-year-old Doris officially adopted 35-year-old Chandi, who took the name Chandi Duke Hefner. The brand-new daughter turned out to be clever and shrewd. She immediately replaced Doris's accountant and hired a new security chief. Both had previously worked for Chandi's sister. Under Doris's will, everything, nearly $1.5 billion, was to pass to Chandi. The entry into motherhood was celebrated riotously. Under the drawing room windows wandered the precious camels, and the orders were handed down by a barefoot butler with a diamond earring. That was Bernard Lafferty. Soon after the revels, Doris fell seriously ill. Her knees began to swell. Doctors prescribed a course of steroid injections. It must be noted that such treatment can often have unpleasant side effects. The patient becomes suggestible and easily falls under the sway of anyone who poses as a close confidant. At this point, Lafferty began to watch the food served to his mistress with great vigilance. Once he even called the police. According to him, a dish served to Doris had been poisoned. From 1991 to 1993, the butler became the tobacco princess's closest person. She trusted him without limit, abandoning the rule her father had once drilled into her. And meanwhile, very strange things were happening in her house. The physician who had been monitoring her was no longer invited to see Doris. She for some reason refused the services of Chemical Bank and replaced her attorney with a little-known lawyer from Chicago. She revoked funds already granted to the Martha Graham School of Dance, which triggered a full-blown scandal, something the world of philanthropy does not forgive. And then the daughter brought home a young man named James Burns, who practiced alternative healing methods. Chandi and James, quite openly, made love in Doris's house. She knew about it, but said nothing. Dr. Burns grew so brazen that he began to act in the house as if he were the master. Naturally, Lafferty did not like this. He gave daughter Chandi a scolding. In response, she tore the 5-carat diamond from his ear and, hidden in a piece of meat, fed it to Lafferty's favorite Great Dane. Relations among the members of that so-called family became unbearable. The adopted daughter blamed the charged atmosphere on the steroid treatment and advised her mother to stop the injections, and at the same time to dismiss the butler, who, in her opinion, was turning the mother against Chandi. During this period, Doris complained to anyone who would listen that she felt terrible, that she was being poisoned, that she was being given drugs in secret. Sometimes she added that she was very afraid of Chandi. Finally, after yet another complaint about her daughter, Doris, accompanied by the butler, flew to Los Angeles. From there, she phoned and ordered Chandi to get out of the house with Burns, without even a couple of hours to pack. After that, the tobacco princess rewrote her will several times. From the winter of 1993 on, a curtain seemed to fall over Doris Duke's life, and almost no one was allowed to look behind it. All contact was possible only through Lafferty. In his ear he again wore a diamond, now weighing 7 carats. Guards were posted throughout the house, and outside the mansion he traveled only with a personal chauffeur. Lafferty often wandered the house drunk. Entering Doris's rooms, he would comb her hair like that of a little girl, telling her she grew more beautiful by the day. To all of Doris's friends, whom Lafferty met away from the house, he invariably said that everything was fine with the mistress. The denouement of this mysterious story is dreadful. Doris suddenly demanded immediate surgery on her knees. She insisted that gangrene was beginning. Lafferty did not try to dissuade her. Summoning doctors, he merely clarified that the mistress wanted her legs amputated. Psychologically not entirely well, Doris was hospitalized at a medical center in Los Angeles. During the operation, an operation that, as later emerged, was unnecessary, she died of cardiac arrest. Before the surgery, literally 2 hours before her death, Lafferty left her hospital room. Nurses testified in court that he was smiling as he walked out of the clinic. After he left, Doris drew up her last will, the fifth in all, naming the butler as her sole heir. And this from the same woman who had once said, "No wills, never. Let them tear each other's throats out for the money." Lafferty came to the funeral barefoot. The servants said he wept bitterly. After the will was read, Chandi filed suit to have the inheritance rights reviewed, and openly accused Lafferty of turning Doris against her adopted daughter. To all accusations, Lafferty replied imperturbably, "I did only what my mistress wanted. Nothing else concerns me." The investigation into Lafferty's death revealed very little. That he had been poisoned was beyond doubt. Apparently someone whom Lafferty knew well had managed to enter the house. It was assumed that the killer somehow administered a powerful drug to Lafferty, and then, disguising his voice, telephoned the butler on duty and ordered all the servants to leave the house. The only witness who could have named the killer lay in a ditch with his throat cut. The thread snapped, and Doris Duke's millions await their next victim.